Senator O'Sullivan. Senator Reynolds.
Thank you very much, Acting Deputy President. I too rise to speak on this bill and the issue more widely. But first of all, can I commend a number of my colleagues here this evening. Firstly, can I commend my good friend and colleague, Senator Brockman, for his impassioned and very coherent summary of the issue that's now confronting us with the impending live export ban of sheep. There is no one who knows more about the issue, and there is no one more passionate about farmers and the communities across Western Australia that will be impacted so negatively. Can I also congratulate other federal colleagues, obviously Senator O'Sullivan, Rick Wilson, who has been an incredibly passionate advocate, because the majority of the 3,500 farmers and supporting communities will be devastated in his electorate of O'Connor, and also, of course, Melissa Price, who has also been a tireless champion for her farmers and for the industry. But I'd also particularly like to note my state colleague, Steve Martin, MLC, who has done an extraordinary job on this issue. And not coming from the farm, from a farm myself or from the land, I've learnt a lot from my colleagues, and I'm incredibly proud of how, as a Liberal team, we have stood together in support of Western Australia and standing up against this outrageous knee-jerk reaction by the Labor Party yet again. But of course, this is not only appallingly bad government policy, it's also, as Senator Brockman has pointed out, a pattern of behaviour by Labor when in government. They have supported the knee-jerk reaction, of which is still having ramifications across Australia and including Western Australia, in their ban on live cattle trade. And as Senator Brockman has said, you can be absolutely certain that more will continue. And I'll come to the bill in a moment, but I also want to talk about one aspect of this philosophical approach by Labor, which has been informed, as Senator Brockman so eloquently said, by extremists, by radicals who are incredibly, incredibly misguided and selfish. Australia plays an important role, not only in feeding the rest of the world, but also in providing nations who have protein deficiencies in ensuring that they can get the protein that they need. Now, by denying some of our poorest nations who we support with the provision of protein, nobody has stopped to think about the implications in these nations. Now, why do we have live meat and animal exports? One, for cultural and religious reasons, but secondly, because the countries who most need our source of protein, quite often they don't have cold chain infrastructure, and many of the houses certainly do not have refrigeration. So it is essential that we get the livestock there so that it can be slaughtered locally and provided to the people who simply don't have the cold chain provisions there. Protein is an important part of human diets, but an estimated 1 billion people today still suffer from a serious protein deficiency. The problem is most severe in Central Africa and South Asia, where about 30% of children consume far too little protein. And now, while there is work being done globally, scientific work on new forms of protein or artificial forms of protein, these are probably decades away. And this ideological deception criminal actions in some cases is not only hurting many West Australians and Australians, but it is also incredibly selfish, because not only will you be denying meat and animals, or animals and meat, from a country that now has the highest animal welfare standards in terms of transporting animals, but they will go elsewhere to countries that don't have the same standards that we do here in Australia. And it's a bit like those opposite who think that it's okay in terms of minerals, where nobody mines minerals more environmentally friendly, slavery-free and ethically than Australia. But, hey, that's okay. We'll just let people get it from other countries where it has slavery in the supply chain, human slavery in the supply chain, where it is far dirtier on the environment. But, hey, I feel okay about this. And that's exactly what those opposite are caving into in this circumstance. So let's have a look a little bit further at the impact on Western Australia. So the independent panel, which Minister Murray-Watt announced first in a Sky News interview in June 2022 that he would be ending live sheep exports, but that it was justified on the basis of evidence. Well, as we've heard time and time again in the inquiry and also in this chamber, there is no evidence, because the evidence demonstrates that we have made significant improvements in how we deal with live animals exports. So he's not been able to point to any of the evidence, and in fact, if anybody was reading the West Australian today, they will find, and again, I won't go over the ground because Senator Brockman very effectively went through that, but the Emmanuel case, after several years, completely collapsed. It collapsed because there was no evidence, and there was no credible evidence. So what evidence is Minister Watt talking about? We don't know. But the independent panel on the phasing out of live sheep exports, called the panel, was appointed, as I said, by Minister Watt. He mentioned it in 2022 and he appointed the panel in March 2023. Now, this panel conducted consultations with stakeholders and received over 4,100 submissions. The panel also received submissions from international live animal export trading partners, and together with feedback from public consultations that were conducted throughout rural Western Australia, it is absolutely clear that ending this trade will not only hurt farmers but the entire farming ecosystem that supports them. And it will certainly also damage our international reputation, because we have the reputation as the best supply of clean, green sheep meat that is humanely farmed, transported and exported according to Australia's now incredibly stringent animal welfare requirements. Now, the value of this trade has recently been assessed as $143 million and supports, as we've heard, around about 3,500 regional jobs, the majority of which are in Western Australia. Now, there are also other pressures currently on the industry. The shortages of labour in abattoirs, coupled with the Qatar Airways decision by the Labor government, means there is very little capacity for the over 500,000 sheep that will no longer be exported after this ban takes effect. And it's also very worth noting that the type of sheep ordered for the Middle East market are lighter in body condition and older than the preference is for the Australian domestic market. So what is going to happen to over 500,000 sheep? Now, since the panel was formed in March 2023, WA farmer confidence has plummeted and sheep prices have scandalously dropped to $1 to $2 per head. $1 to $2 per head per sheep. This time last year, they were worth between $150 and $180 a head. Recently, a WA farmer advertised 600 sheep to give away for free. and he's now facing the prospect of having to shoot the remainder of his sheep. Now, fortunately, the live sheep trade has just resumed after the summer moratorium, with over 100,000 sheep already shipped from Fremantle Port, somewhat relieving the current glut that is predicted to create an on-farm feed shortage later this summer. So, and while both Minister Watt and Farrell maintain the live sheep export phase-out will not affect the cattle trade, if anybody here believes that is true, they are dreaming. What they haven't acknowledged publicly is that some Middle East markets receive their cattle co-shipments with sheep. And, for example, on the day the conflict broke out in Israel, 5,000 cattle and 3,000 sheep arrived from Fremantle to Israel. And prior to this year's Northern Summer moratorium, 4 out of 11 vessels had sheep and cattle on board shipments out of Fremantle. So while the opposition will not be opposing this bill, I think the context and the scandal of what this government has done should be yet another stain on those opposite. Somewhat humorously, Senator McGrath, just before question time, stood up and he was going to talk about all of the Labor government achievements, and he couldn't think of a single one. Sadly, in just 18 months, the lists of things that the government has got wrong and is turning the nation's economy backwards very quickly, releasing violent offenders out into our streets, and the list goes on and on and on. And sadly, for Western Australia's farmers, for our economy, for food security, for protein deficits to be filled, this will go down as another completely outrageous, unnecessary and punitive acquisition to the animal welfare groups, who are incredibly selfish, lie and do not care one jot about the impact they have on food security elsewhere, and they certainly do not care, as we do here on this side, and particularly my WA colleagues, about the families and the lives that they are ruining. And all I can say is shame on you.
Thank you, Senator Reynolds.